In the waning days of the Third Age, when peace had long settled upon Middle-earth after the fall of the Dark Lord, a tremor ran through the roots of the White Mountain. The Dunedain Rangers who patrolled the ancient paths spoke in hushed tones of drums that echoed from within the stone, drums that had not been heard since the days when the dead men walked. Aragorn, now King Elessar of Gondor, sat upon his throne in Minas Tirith when the first reports reached him. Captain Baragond of the Guard stood before him, his weathered face grave with concern. "My lord, the shepherds of Lamadon flee their homes. They speak of war drums that sound from the paths of the dead, and of shadows that move where no shadows should be." The king's gray eyes darkened. "Have you sent word to Legolas and Gimli?" "Aye, my lord. They ride even now from the glittering cave. Prince Imrahil brings word from Dol Amroth that the sea itself grows restless, as if some ancient power stirs beneath the waves." Elessar rose from his seat, his hand instinctively moving to Andúral's hilt. 20 years had passed since he had walked the paths of the dead and called upon the Oathbreakers. He had thought their curse lifted, their debt paid in full. Yet now the mountains sang with the voice of war once more. "Summon the council," he commanded. "Send riders to Edoras and to the Shire. If the White Mountains wake, then all of Middle-earth must know." 3 days hence, in the great hall of Minas Tirith, representatives of the free peoples gathered. King Éomer of Rohan arrived with a company of his finest riders, their spears gleaming in the afternoon sun. From the distant woodland realm came Thranduil's son Legolas, his keen eyes already searching the southern horizon. Gimli, the dwarf, lord of the glittering caves, bore news that chilled the blood. "The very stone speaks of unrest," the dwarf declared, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. "My folk have delved deep beneath the mountains, seeking the source of these drums. What we found." He paused, his knuckles white upon his axe handle. "The ancient halls of the dead are not empty, King Elessar. Something moves there still." Legolas nodded grimly. "The birds speak of it also. They will not fly over the haunted mountain, and the very trees lean away from those peaks, as if they fear what dwells within." Queen Arwen, wise in the lore of her people, stepped forward from where she had been listening in silence. "In the archives of Rivendell, there are scrolls that speak of the Númenórean who first settled these lands. They wrote of something sealed beneath the mountains, something that their kings bound with oaths and stone and starlight. The betrayer kings knew more than they revealed when they broke their oath to Isildur," mused Elessar. Perhaps their curse was not merely punishment, but also guardianship? A horn sounded from the courtyard below, and a ranger stumbled into the hall, his cloak torn, his face pale as death. "My lord," he gasped. "The drums, they sound no more from within the mountain. They march upon the road." Under the pale light of a waning moon, the company rode hard toward the White Mountain. Elessar led them, with Legolas and Gimli at his side, followed by Omer and 20 of his finest riders. The wind carried with it a sound that chilled the blood, the rhythmic beating of drums, not of hide and wood, but of something far more ancient and terrible. As they crested the hills of Lamadon, they saw them, a host of shadows marching in perfect formation along the old road that led from the paths of the dead. These were not the Oathbreakers Elessar had once commanded, for those souls had found their rest. These shapes moved with purpose and malice, and at their head strode a figure clad in the remnants of ancient mail. "Duinhir, preserve us," whispered Éomer. "What are they?" Legolas's sharp eyes pierced the gloom. "They are not the dead we knew. These are older, and their malice runs deeper. See how the very grass withers at their passing?" The shadow host had stopped their march and turned toward the approaching company. The figure at their head raised what might once have been a sword, though it gleamed now with no earthly light. When it spoke, its voice was the grinding of stone upon stone. "King of Gondor," it said, and the words seemed to come from the very earth beneath their feet. "You who broke the ancient compact and freed the oath sworn, you have doomed this realm to face what they were bound to guard against." Elessar rode forward, Anduril singing as it cleared its sheath. The reforged blade blazed with silver fire, and the shadows recoiled. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, and king of Gondor. By what right do you walk these lands and spread fear among my people? The Shadow Lord's hollow laughter echoed across the hills. By right of ancient blood and older betrayal, we are the Númenórean guard of the Deep Vault, and we were betrayed not by oath-breaking, but by oath-keeping. The betrayer kings you freed knew well what slept beneath the mountains, and they bound us to keep eternal watch. But you freed them and left us to face alone what was never meant to wake. In a hidden valley high in the White Mountains, where the ancient roads carved by Númenórean kings wound through mist-shrouded peaks, stood the entrance to the Deep Vault. Here, Elisar's company made camp, while the Shadow Host waited in the darkness beyond. Captain Beregond approached the king where he stood studying the massive stone doors that barred the way into the mountain's heart. The portal bore the seal of the ancient kings of Gondor, but beneath their heraldry lay symbols far older, stars and trees and flowing water, the marks of those who had sailed from Númenor. My lord, Beregond said quietly, the men grow uneasy. They speak of voices in the wind, calling to them from within the mountain. I hear them too, Elisar replied, his hand upon the stone. They are not malevolent, these voices. They are afraid. Gimli emerged from his examination of the door's mechanisms, shaking his head in wonder. This was not built to keep enemies out, but to keep something in. The dwarven work is master. It serves the stonecraft of the Númenórean. These locks will yield only to the blood of king. As if in response to his word, the ancient symbols upon the door began to glow with a pale light. Elisar stepped back, Anduril in his hand, as the massive portal slowly ground open. From within came not the musty air of ages, but something else, the sound of singing, beautiful and terrible, in a tongue that predated the common speech. Legolas's face grew pale. That is Quenya, but older than any I have heard. It speaks of binding, of sacrifice, of a choice between light and darkness that was made long ago. Then we must learn what choice our forebears made, Elisar declared, and whether it can be unmade. The Shadow Lord appeared at his shoulder, no longer seeming an enemy but a fellow guardian standing watch. Be warned, King of Gondor, what lies below is sealed for good reason. The Valar themselves wept when it was done. The passage led deep into the living rock of the mountain, lit by crystalline formations that pulsed with their own inner light. The company descended in silence, save for the echo of their footsteps and the ever-present song that seemed to emanate from the very stones. This architecture, Gimli murmured, running his hands along the perfectly fitted stones, it predates even the oldest dwarven hall. This was built in the Elder Days, when the Númenóreans still remembered the light of Valinor. The passage opened into a vast chamber, and there they beheld a sight that struck wonder and terror into their hearts. In the center of the hall stood a pillar of crystal that reached from floor to vaulted ceiling, and within that crystal, preserved as if in sleep, was a figure of terrible beauty. She was tall as the Eldar, but with the bearing of the Edain. Her hair was silver as starlight, and her robes seemed woven from moonbeam. Yet about her was bound a chain of adamant, and her face bore an expression of infinite sorrow. Varda preserve us, whispered Legolas. She is of the Maiar. Around the crystal pillar stood 9 figures in ancient armor, their faces peaceful in death. These were not the corrupted forms of the Shadow Host, but noble lords of Númenor who had given their lives to maintain the binding. The Shadow Lord materialized beside them, and for the first time, his form seemed less terrible and more sorrowful. Behold, Tindomiel, the fair singer, she who was loved by Tar-Palantir, but was revealed to be a servant of the darkness. Yet in her was found a spark of the original music, and she could not be destroyed without destroying also the song that holds the very foundations of Arda together. Queen Arwen gasped, understanding flooding her features. The binding of the song. It is mentioned in the most ancient scrolls of Rivendell, She carries within her both the music of creation and the discord of Melkor's marring. To destroy her would unravel reality itself. And so the faithful bound her here, continued the Shadow Lord, with her willing consent, for she loved Middle-earth more than her freedom. But the binding weakens, and she stirs. Already her song touches the borders of the world. As understanding dawned upon the company, the crystal began to pulse with a rhythm like that of a great heart. The song grew stronger, and with it came visions, glimpses of what would come to pass should Tyndomiel break free. They saw the seas rising to swallow coastal lands, the forests withering as reality bent and twisted, the very stars falling from the sky as the music of creation was corrupted from within. Yet they also saw moments of transcendent beauty, healing that surpassed all understanding, art and music that could move mountains, love that could bridge even the gap between life and death. She is both salvation and doom, Elessar realized. The Valar could not bring themselves to destroy her, for she carries too much of what was good in the original design. The Shadow Lord nodded grimly. For 3,000 years, we have stood guard. The betrayer kings knew, and they agreed to share the burden. When you freed them, the weight fell upon us alone. We are failing, King of Gondor. The binding will not hold much longer. Eomer stepped forward, his sword still in its sheath, but his hand ready. Then what would you have us do? We cannot let her wait, yet we cannot maintain this vigil forever. There may be another way, said a new voice, clear as silver bells. They turned to see an elf lord approaching through the shadows. Elrond half-elven, though his presence there was impossible, for he had sailed into the west 20 years past. Lord Elrond, Legolas exclaimed. But how? I am not Elrond as you knew him. The figure replied with a sad smile. I am his memory, his knowledge, preserved in this place by the same art that bound Tyndomiel. The true Elrond sent this echo of himself to await the day when the binding would fail. He approached the crystal pillar, placing his hand upon its surface. There is a way to renew the binding, but it requires a sacrifice greater than the one made before. One of royal blood must take her place, becoming the focal point of the song, holding both its creative and destructive aspects in balance. The company fell silent, understanding the terrible choice that lay before them. In the deepest part of the night, as the company rested in the ancient chamber, Elessar walked alone among the statues of the Númenórean guard. Their faces were noble even in death, bearing the peace of those who had died for a cause greater than themselves. You are considering it, said Arwen's voice from behind him. She had followed him into the depth, as he had known she would. How can I not? He replied, not turning to face her. I am the heir of those who made this binding. The responsibility falls to me. And I am Elrond's daughter, she said, stepping to his side. The lore of the binding flows in my blood as well. Why should the burden be yours alone? Before he could answer, Gimli's gruff voice echoed through the chamber. If we're speaking of noble sacrifice, then remember that dwarves know something of bearing burdens that others cannot. The song speaks to stone, and we are children of Aula the Smith. And the Eldar have carried such weights before, added Legolas, appearing from the shadows with his usual grace. My father's people remember the kinslaying, and how some chose exile over forgiveness. This would be a cleaner doom. Eomer laughed, but there was no humor in it. Must I remind you all that the blood of kings runs in Rohan as well? I am descended from Eorl, who answered Gondor's call at the Pelennor. Would you have me be less brave than my ancestor? The echo of Elrond stepped forward, his ancient eyes sad but proud. You all have the courage needed, but courage alone will not suffice. The binding requires understanding, a deep knowledge of the music and its harmonies. Few living beings possess such wisdom. But I do, came a voice like distant thunder, and the air shimmered as Gandalf the White materialized in the chamber. Yet this too was not the Mithrandir they had known, but something greater and more terrible. I am Olorin, servant of Manwë, and I have walked in the timeless halls where the music was first sung. I have returned at great cost to see this matter resolved. The Astari's presence filled the chamber with light, and before that radiant, even the crystal holding Tyndomiel seemed to dim. The Valar have debated this matter for an age, and at last they have reached a decision. The binding will be renewed, but not as it was before. Gandalf's revelation brought both hope and new fear. As his true nature blazed forth in the ancient chamber, the company felt themselves in the presence of one of the Ainur themselves, a being who had helped shape the very foundations of the world. The original binding was flawed, Gandalf explained, his staff blazing with starlight. It sought to contain both aspects of Tyndomiel's nature, her creative force and her potential for destruction. But the music of creation cannot be caged, only channeled. What is needed is not a prison, but a conductor. He approached the crystal pillar, and at his touch, it rang like a great bell. Tyndomiel must be awakened, but awakened into willing service. The choice must be hers, made with full knowledge of what she is and what she might become. The Shadow Lord recoiled. Impossible. The corruption runs too deep. If she wakes, she will remember her loyalty to the darkness. Sut, will she? Gandalf asked, turning to face the spectral guardian. Or will she remember why she chose to be bound in the first place? Love for Middle-earth drove her to this sacrifice. Perhaps love can drive her to make it again, freely given. Elisar stepped forward, Andúril gleaming in his hand. What would you have us do? The binding must be dissolved carefully, layer by layer. As each constraint is removed, one of you must speak to her, reminding her of what she chose to protect. The Númenórean guards gave their lives to maintain the physical binding. You must give something of yourselves to maintain the spiritual one. And if she chooses destruction, Éomer asked bluntly. Gandalf's eyes held depths of starlight and shadow. Then we will face that darkness together, as we have faced it before. But I must believe, that the music of creation is stronger than its corruption. The echo of Elrond raised his hand. There is more. The binding has held not just Tyndomiel, but also the knowledge she possessed. When she wakes, she will remember things lost since the fall of Númenor. The locations of the lost Palantiri, the secrets of the Rings of Power, perhaps even the location of the straight road to Valinor. Knowledge that could heal much that was broken, Arwen whispered, or destroy what little remains whole. They began at dawn, though no light of the sun penetrated the depths of the mountain. Gandalf stood before the crystal pillar, his staff raised high, while the others formed a circle around him. The Shadow Lord and his ghostly companions watched from the edges of the chamber, ready to act should things go awry. Remember, Gandalf instructed, you must speak from the heart. She will sense any falsehood, any doubt. Speak of what you love about Middle-earth, what you would preserve, what you would see flourish. The first layer of binding dissolved at Gandalf's command, and immediately the chamber filled with music. Not the desperate song they had heard before, but something achingly beautiful. It spoke of green hills and silver rivers, of the laughter of children and the wisdom of ages. Tyndomiel's eyes opened within the crystal, and they were like pools of starlight. When she spoke, her voice was the whisper of wind through growing leaves. I remember, she said slowly, the binding, the choice. How long? 3,000 years, Elisar answered, stepping forward. 3,000 years of peace, because of your sacrifice. Another layer dissolved, and Tyndomiel's form became clearer. She was beautiful beyond mortal description, but in her beauty was also terrible power. The very air around the crystal began to shimmer with possibility. The world has changed, she said, and now her voice carried harmonics that made the stone itself sing in response. I can feel it. The shadow is gone, truly gone, this time. Sauron is defeated, Legolas confirmed. The ring is destroyed. Middle-earth is free. A third layer fell away, and with it came danger. The chamber trembled as reality itself seemed to bend around Tyndomiel's awakening consciousness. One of the ancient statues cracked and crumbled to dust. The power grows wild, Gimli observed, his hand tight on his axe. She must choose soon, or choice will be taken from all of us. Tyndomiel's gaze fixed upon Arwen, and between them passed a recognition that transcended words. "You are of Elrond's line," she said. "I knew your ancestor when the world was young and hope still lived in the hearts of men." "Then you know," Arwen replied steadily, "that hope lives still." The final bindings began to dissolve, and with them came chaos. The chamber filled with impossible vision, glimpses of what might be, could be, would be, if the music were allowed to run free. Mountains walked like men, the sea sang lullabies to the stars, and flowers bloomed that could heal any wound or grant any wish. But darker visions came as well. Cities swallowed by singing forests, men transformed into living songs that forgot their humanity, the very concept of death becoming meaningless as reality bent to accommodate every desperate wish. "I remember now," Tindómil said, her voice carrying both wonder and terror. "I remember what I am, servant of Melkor, but touched by the light of Eru, capable of creating paradise, or unmaking everything that is." The last binding shattered, and she stepped free of the crystal, the chamber filled with light that hurt to look upon, and the company felt the weight of her attention like the gaze of stars. "Why did you wake me?" she asked, and in her question was genuine curiosity. The binding could have held for centuries more. "What desperation drove you to this risk?" Gandalf stepped forward, his own light blazing to match hers. "Not desperation, but hope. The world has been healed of its greatest wounds, but scars remain. We thought, we hoped, that you might choose healing over destruction, creation over unmaking." Tindómil laughed, and it was like silver bells and distant thunder. "You ask me to be what I was made to be, rather than what I was corrupted to become. Do you understand the danger? I am still touched by the discord. I could heal your world, or heal it so thoroughly that nothing mortal could survive the perfection. Then choose carefully," Elisar said simply, "as you did before, as we all must, every day." She turned to study each of them in turn, and they felt their souls laid bare before her gaze. The heir of Isildur, carrying guilt for the choices of his ancestors. The elf prince, mourning the fading of his people. The dwarf lord, seeking to rebuild what was lost. The horse lord, protecting traditions that may not survive the changing world. The Evenstar, bridging two kindreds. And Olorin the Grey, bearing burdens that would crush lesser spirits. "We are all flawed," Arwen admitted, "but we are also all striving to do better." "Yes," Tindómil mused, "flawed, mortal, struggling, beautifully, terribly, imperfect." She smiled, and for a moment, her terrible beauty became simply beautiful. That is what Melkor never understood. Perfection is not the goal of the music. Harmony is. Tindómil's decision seemed to hover in the air like a half-heard melody, when suddenly the chamber shook with a power that was not hers. The walls cracked, and through the fissures came a presence that filled the company with dread, ancient, malevolent, and terrifyingly familiar. "Impossible," Gandalf breathed, his light flickering for the first time. "He is gone. We saw his tower fall, his ring destroyed." But the voice that echoed through the chamber was indeed that of Sauron, though changed, diminished, yet somehow more terrible for its weakness. "Fools! Did you think the destruction of one ring could unmake power that has endured since the music first was sung? I am more than the ring, more than the flesh that bore it. I am discord given form, and while the world contains imperfection, I endure." The Shadow Lord's spectral form blazed with sudden understanding. "The binding!" he cried. It was never meant just to hold Tindómil. She was the lock, but he was what was locked away. Sauron's true essence, the part of him that could not be destroyed, bound beneath the mountains. Tindómil stepped back, horror dawning in her starlit eyes. "I remember now, not just my choice, but why it had to be made. When Sauron's physical form was first defeated by Gil-galad and Elendil, part of his spirit fled here, to the deep places where the foundations of the world run strongest. The Númenóreans found it and knew it could not be destroyed without unmaking creation itself. So they bound it with the one thing that could contain it," Gandalf said grimly, "one who carried both the creative and destructive aspects of the music." You were not just imprisoned, Tindaumiel. You were made into a living cage. The presence of Sauron pressed against them like a weight of centuries, and his voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The binding weakens. Soon I will be free to work my will upon the world, and this time there will be no ring to serve as focus for my power. I will be discord itself, unbound and uncontainable. Not if I can help it, Tindaumiel said, and her voice carried new resolve. She turned to face the company, and they saw that she had made her choice. I understand now why I was wakened, not to be freed, but to choose my bondage anew. But this time, I will not be a passive vessel. This time, I will be an active guardian. She began to sing, and her song was like nothing they had ever heard, beautiful beyond description, yet terrible in its power. The chamber filled with light that banished shadows, and Sauron's presence recoiled with a shriek of rage and pain. The final battle was not fought with sword and bow, but with music and will. Tindaumiel's song rose through the chamber, piercing the stone and reaching toward the sky, while Sauron's discord sought to corrupt and twist her melody into something dark and terrible. I cannot do this alone, she called to the company, her voice strained with effort. The music requires harmony, not solo performance. Each of you must add your voice to mine. But we are not musicians, Éomer protested, even as he felt the pull of her song. You are more than that, she replied. You are the voices of your peoples, the songs of your hearts. Sing of what you love, of what you would preserve, of what makes life worth living. And so they sang, each in their own way. Elessar's voice carried the weight of kingship and the hope of peace. Arwen sang of love that bridges differences and endures beyond death. Legolas's clear tenor spoke of forests and flowing water, of beauty that outlasts the year. Gimli's deep bass told of mountains and deep halls, of craftsmanship and loyalty. Éomer's voice rang with the thunder of hooves and the freedom of wide plain. Even the Shadow Lord and his ghostly companions added their voices, singing of duty and sacrifice, of oaths kept even beyond death. But it was Gandalf who provided the foundation, his song reaching back to the beginning of all things, to the music of the Ainur that shaped the world. Under his guidance, their separate melodies wove together into a harmony that was greater than the sum of its parts. Sauron's discord fought against them, seeking to turn love into obsession, hope into despair, beauty into corruption. But it could not stand against the freely given harmony of those who chose to sing together rather than alone. It is finished, Tindaumiel said at last, her song softening to a gentle lullaby that would continue forever in the deep places of the mountain. The discord is bound once more, not by chains of adamant, but by bonds of freely chosen harmony. It will sleep now until the world's end, and perhaps beyond. She turned to face them one last time, and they saw that she had chosen to remain, to be the eternal guardian of the prison she had helped to forge. But she no longer seemed trapped or sorrowful. Instead, she appeared as what she had always been meant to be, a servant of the music, a guardian of harmony. Will you be content here? Arwen asked softly. Tindaumiel smiled, and her smile held depths of peace that mortal hearts could barely comprehend. I will be what I was meant to be, neither creator nor destroyer, but the guardian of the balance between them, and I will not be alone. The songs you have sung will echo here forever, reminding me of why the choice is worth making. As they prepared to leave the deep chamber, now filled with gentle light and peaceful music, Elessar looked back one last time. Will we see you again? When the world has need, she replied, when the harmony is threatened and voices are required to restore it. Until then, I keep watch, and the songs of the free peoples keep me company. They climbed toward the surface, leaving behind the Guardian and her eternal vigil. Behind them, the war drums of the White Mountains had fallen silent forever, replaced by a gentler rhythm, the heartbeat of a world at peace. Watched over by those who had chosen harmony over discord, creation over destruction. And in the years that followed, travelers in the White Mountains spoke of hearing music on the wind, not the drums of war, but the songs of hope, love, and the enduring power of freely chosen harmony. Thus ends the tale of the war drums of the White Mountain and the last great binding of the Third Age. May its songs echo until the world's end, and may all who hear them remember that even the greatest discord cannot stand against the harmony of hearts that choose to sing as one.